Reverend Peter House is a 2000 graduate of Meadville Lombard Theological School. He has served as ministerial intern and summer minister at the First Unitarian Congregation of Toronto, summer minister at First Unitarian Church in Rochester, New York, and has served since 2007 as a summer minister at the First Universalist Church of Rochester. During the year, Peter is a special education teacher working with 5th grade students. Peter and his partner, Michael Hannon, live in Rochester.
So I did tell a couple people already this morning, I want everyone to know that I violated 2 of my sacred boundaries to be here this morning. The first one being, I never come in the wintertime. And the second one, after a couple of years, I decided I was never coming on a Bills Sunday. Because there was one time when the Bills traffic was so bad that the service had already started when I walked in. And I remember seeing all these anxious looks and this, oh, he's here. So you know I really wanted to be here today. So as was said in the little intro, I did go to Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago. And like most schools in those days, it was a residential program where we went and stayed full time. It has now become an exclusively online institution from what I understand. But in my day, we went there and most of us lived right at the school full time. So I was very excited to go there. And it was still, in spite of the fact that I was excited, it was a bit daunting for a homebody like me to pack up my Honda Civic and drive all the way to Chicago all by myself, having to navigate the streets, find the school, and figure everything out all by myself. Many of my classmates had spouses with them or family helping them, but I did it all alone, all by myself. And the first few days, it was really surprising to me. I was extremely homesick. I was like 35 at the time, and I thought I was too old to get homesick, but I wasn't. Classes hadn't started yet, and I really didn't know anyone there at all. As I had to navigate around the biggest city I had ever lived in by trial and error, because keep in mind, this is in the days before Google Maps and smartphones. So I had to find the grocery store, and the laundromat, and the post office, all by looking in books and then getting out paper maps. I was calling my mother twice a day just to keep myself tethered to some sense of connection and belonging. I think she enjoyed that. It was the most I had needed her in years. And reassuring and reminding myself that I wasn't floating in a bubble of solitude and strangeness forever. I just needed to wait until things got started. And they did. The 4th or the 5th day I was there, orientation began. And we all packed up a bag, and then we carpooled to a retreat center out somewhere in the suburbs all together. And it was there that I met the incoming class of 2000. It was a very diverse group of people. There was a man who was over 60, an African-American woman in her 50s from inner city Detroit, a young man who had overcome severe depression and suicide attempts and had gone on to create a successful nonprofit organization. A model gorgeous young woman who had been a professional dancer and then had managed a Liz Claiborne store before going to seminary. We had an accomplished poet, and then we had Joseph, a young man from Seattle who presented as the guy that Central Casting would send over if you asked for young Republican type. He was, in reality, quite liberal and progressive and compassionate. He just came across as the epitome of the traditional conservative man due to his demeanor, his looks, and his choice of wardrobe. And then there was Dina, an unassuming-looking woman in her mid-30s. Dina was the first person that I found myself drawn to. She radiated kind of a cozy warmth and an understated charm that just kind of drew people in. We've all met people like that. I bet we'll be friends, I recalled thinking to myself, after our first conversation. A conversation, by the way, in which she had deftly and skillfully drawn me out and elicited some intimate confessions from me that I usually reserved to those closest to me. I recall wondering a few times if I should really be answering such personal questions from someone that I had just met. But I figured we're going to be ministers together, and Meadville Lombard had accepted her as a student, so she must be someone worthy of my trust, right? The entire retreat weekend that we were on was very thoughtfully planned. It was a series of rituals designed to create a sense of deep, trusting, and connected community. And through these activities and rituals, we achieved a depth of respect and compassion and connection that I carry to this day for that group of people. I can still remember every single one of those classmates in vivid detail, including everything they said about themselves when we were introducing ourselves to each other. At the closing of this weekend, there was a ritual in which we were presented with class of 2,000 necklaces. Each of the necklaces made for us by hand by the members of the class of 1999. This was a tradition that the class that had been there last year made these necklaces for the incomers. And as a member of the class of 99 hung the necklace around each of our necks one by one, we pledged to love and honor and support each other through the long and sometimes lonely journey that ministry can be. It was a vow kind of like a marriage vow, including the idea, by the way, that it was a vow for life. And it was one that I knew that each person there made sincerely and without reservation. I can still reach into my heart and pull out the emotion that I felt that day. It was a truly sacred moment in my life. So we had left the campus to go out to that retreat center on Friday afternoon as a group of wary but hopeful strangers. And when we returned to campus that Sunday night, we were a connected, confident, and cohesive group. My homesickness was gone, replaced by a reassuring sense of belonging to something deep and important. And it seemed that we all felt that way. As soon as we were back on campus, the visiting and the collective spirit commenced. There were the shared outings to the grocery store, impromptu gatherings, the borrowing of eggs and cups of laundry detergent, and endless hours of conversation. The everyday bonding experiences which create and nurture a community. One thing I remember from that entire first semester was that we all wore those necklaces all the time. We gathered every Wednesday morning for breakfast and every Friday evening for dinner. I remember one particular rainy Friday evening we were all having pizza at a place called the Medici on 57th Street. And I remember looking around the table at this extremely diverse group, but cohesive group, and seeing the same necklace dangling from everyone's neck, and having this feeling that I was home, that we all belonged, and that we would continue to belong for life. Those necklaces were a very powerful symbol. We wore them because, like wedding bands, they represented something, a commitment, a covenant, a connection which seemed as robust as it could possibly be, and that it would always endure. One that could be tested and pass. One that would bounce back when stretched. One that might chip or crack, but still wouldn't break. And I suspect that I wasn't the only member of the group that was seduced by the promise of certainty that those necklaces represented, or who believed that I could count on this community to be robust and durable and resilient. That Friday evening when I observed that everyone was wearing the necklaces is still very vivid in my mind. And recalling that image, frozen in my mind the way the final image of a movie or a TV show freezes to create a good image that will stay with the viewer, also brings to mind for me the most valuable lesson that I ended up learning from my time in that community. And that is how fragile community really is and how easily it can be fractured. You see, I wasn't the only member of that community who felt a sense of ease with my friend Dina. I wasn't the only person who disclosed more to her than I usually did in conversations. I wasn't alone in my belief that she was a kindred spirit. As the semester went on, it seemed that several members of our group felt the same way that I did, and behaved in the same way that I had, sharing things with Dina that we usually didn't, especially when we were hurt or angry or disappointed, even with other people in our group. Dina had a gift for showing up when people were most vulnerable and offering a shoulder to cry on, a confidential place to vent, a safe outlet for those less than noble thoughts that we all have about others but are reluctant to share. Dina was so receptive to hearing one's ignoble feelings and baser thoughts that these thoughts and emotions, when you were sharing them with her, didn't seem so bad anymore. The way Dina coaxed them out of people and then affirmed that they weren't nearly as bad as we had feared them to be, had a way of normalizing them and making them palatable. And this normalization, of course, then encouraged further sharing. We all know that feeling, right? We've all been there. We say to ourselves, okay, I've already said this much, after all. Any harm has probably already been done, right? And this actually, it feels kind of good. So why not just go all in and just say it all? Now at this point, I have to explain that a large part of the persona that Dina cultivated was what many people in recent years have come to call social justice warrior. She was highly attuned to spotting isms, sexism, racism, homophobia. She was always the first person to call out any hint of injustice that she saw. She constantly was saying things like, that's a sexist remark, that's a racist comment, you're being really, really homophobic. Several times during that first semester, lecture topics would be derailed by Dina's penchant for calling out her classmates or even the professors on any perceived insensitivity, and then refusing to accept any apology or any concession the offender was willing to make, no matter how innocent the misstep had been or how sincere the offer to recant was. After this happened a couple of times, I began to reflect a little bit in my mind on the kinds of confessions that Dina was most interested in eliciting from people. By this point in our journey together, some of us had begun to have conversations with each other about what we had experienced with Dina. And we had begun to see that what most interested Dina was luring people into admitting to thoughts or past acts that could possibly be seen as bigoted or insensitive. She had gotten a few people to admit things like having bullied gay kids when they themselves were kids before they knew better. She got one woman to confess that she had grown up in a small, all-white town and that she still struggled with a certain fear when she saw non-white men walking on the street at night when she was alone, even though she knew that her fears were simply based on implicit racism that permeates American culture, and she was working on it. And most damaging, it would turn out, Joseph, remember our young Republican friend, he confessed to Dina that in spite of the fact that he knew better, he often felt threatened by the knowledge that his wife had a very lucrative career and in all likelihood would always be the primary earner in their household. The reason that we had begun to have conversations about Dina with each other was that around Thanksgiving time, our confessional sessions with Dina had taken on a new element. While in the beginning, Dina had simply listened with open empathy, she now began to say things to us like, you know, you probably never should admit that to anyone else. Other people wouldn't be as understanding as I am. And always, it seems that she would add something like, but don't worry, your secret is safe with me. I won't tell anyone, unless something happens where I need to. I later learned that one member of our group had pressed her on a few occasions to explain what she was getting at when she said that. And Dina said that she felt that she had a sacred duty to expose anyone who was racist or sexist or homophobic for the good not just of the Unitarian Universalist Association, but for the good of the world in general. And just a couple of weeks after a handful of us started to have concerns, the dam burst open. We were at our Friday evening get-together, and people had had a little bit of wine, and Joseph, our young Republican archetype, offered a criticism of a piece that we had read in class that week that was written by a feminist theologian. To be clear, Joseph did not in any way comment on the identity of the theologian. He simply stated that one of the arguments that she made in her piece wasn't fleshed out enough in his opinion. Exactly, by the way, the type of critical thinking that we were being encouraged in class to engage in. Surely, the African-American woman from Detroit cut him off when he said that. Well, you would say that, wouldn't you, Mr. Sexist? I know what you think of women. I know you think we should all stay home and cook and clean and let the men run the world. Is that fair? Asked the woman who had confessed to Dina her fear of non-white men. Joseph never made any reference to the author's gender. Of course you defend him, another woman shot back. You're a racist. I know all about you, avoiding people of color on the streets. You think anyone who isn't white is a thief. I know all about you. And from there on, it became a free-for-all. People who just a few months ago had made this covenant to love and nurture and support one another were sniping and accusing and dismissing. Not surprisingly, the gathering broke up prematurely, and we ended up clustering in groups of 2 or 3, depending on who had yelled at who, and we processed our shock and our outrage and our grief. It seemed that all of that goodwill and generosity that had characterized our early days together was nothing but mere window dressing. Cover for the fact that far from being a nurturing community of justice-oriented people, we were instead a nest of vipers, racist, sexist, homophobic vipers. And of course, it was a smart group of people, so it didn't take long before everyone realized that Dina had been the one that was the catalyst for all of this, and had betrayed us by repeating the confessions that she had lured out of us. Apparently, she had felt the need to repeat these things in what she saw as the service of the greater good, just as, to be fair to her, she had warned us she might have to do. By Monday morning, word of what had happened had circulated among the school's faculty, and they immediately scheduled a series of clear the air sessions. I believe they called them, I can't remember what they called them, but it was something like clearing the air. And I recall that the very first one was very, very heated. Emerging issues, that's what they called it. Emerging issues, and we had a series of 4 of them. And I recall that the very first one was very heated, with many of the same accusations being repeated that we had heard that other night, with the same camps kind of hunkering down with each other and people digging in on their positions. Poor Joseph, our young Republican, was confronted the most openly and aggressively with people directly accusing him of being a blatant misogynist, as well as pompous and arrogant and privileged. Literally overnight, all of the goodwill and connection that we had been enjoying and taking support from evaporated and was replaced by resentment and bitterness and a palatable sense of mistrust. The weekly gatherings ended, and we splintered into smaller factions of 2 or 3 people, little groups. And I, by the way, never saw any of those necklaces that had once been so ubiquitous every place. I never saw one of those necklaces around anyone's neck again. The community, which had begun on such a high note of unity and inclusiveness and benevolence, had been reduced to a collection of a few wary tribes and several completely alienated individuals. It wasn't that we stopped interacting with each other. There wasn't open hostility or an obvious withholding of generosity, or there was no desire that I saw to engage in more conflict. And on an individual level, many relationships were repaired to the degree that they could talk to each other and interact. And where this wasn't possible, at least there were a lot of uneasy truces established. People, for the most part, got back to normal, from what I could see anyway, and their best selves won out over any grudges or resentments that they may have been carrying. But something sacred had been shattered that could never be repaired. And while it's tempting to blame the whole thing on Dina, doing so would be to engage in a dangerous denial. As we began to heal, there was a recognition that while yes, Dina had been the catalyst for what had happened, she wasn't the cause. Hadn't we all, after all, given in to our baser instincts on some level by being quick to judge and condemn each other based upon a few statements made in private to a third party and then repeated to us? What I still find noteworthy about the whole incident is that throughout all of these clear the air sessions, no one at any point publicly called Dina out for her direct role and all of the things that she had done to be a catalyst for the conflict. Instead, we were all focused on each other and the hurt and betrayal we felt by what other people had supposedly said or done. The sacredness of the space that we had all created together had been violated and shattered. In the same way that marriages may survive infidelity but are never quite the same again, we healed, we repaired, and we went on. But we had lost something we would never get back. All communities are sacred entities. They need to be carefully nurtured and lovingly maintained. They require goodwill and restraint in equal measure. And most importantly, we must always remember that harmful words once spoken can never, ever really be unheard. All it takes to shatter the sacred is a little unclean and unnecessary venting or one bad faith actor. So, there are a few things that we can all do to nurture our sacred communities. We can remember that we are often very quick to think the worst of people, not to see them in their full context, and not allow them to grow. We don't seem to have a capacity for recognizing that growth can occur in people. Yes, people must be held accountable for past actions if they're damaging. But we all have a duty to make sure, before we judge, that we fully understand those actions in context before we judge and condemn people for them. And we must all allow for growth in other people when we see evidence of it. We can all shut down gossip when it presents itself. We can resist the temptation to agree or to fuel the fire when we're listening. We can be the ones to put water on the fire by toning down our own rhetoric and encouraging others to do the same. We can refrain from griping and venting. This is a hard one. We can call out people like Dina in the moment, because every person sitting here this morning, I'm sure, has known many Dinas. We can judge others by what we ourselves see and experience, not by what we hear secondhand from others. We can reserve charges of isms for true cases that are real examples. Labeling everything as such diminishes the value of these charges when they really need to be used, and they really do need to be used at times. I learned from that story that I told this morning that it is super easy to fracture a community. In my story this morning, one person did it with a little gossip and some careless accusations to a group of people who, by the way, should have known better. Happily, in the conversations we have had in the intervening years, I have seen that we all did learn a lot from that experience. And it informs each of us, each one that I've talked to, and how we all move through the world. As I said, there are Dinas in every group. They are not always malicious people, to be sure. And about Dina herself, I think in many ways, she saw herself as a truth teller and a justice champion. But we all recognize damaging behavior when we see it. We all need to become braver and swifter in pointing it out. And we must all be on guard against feeling the need to feed the beast by giving in to the temptation to confess carelessly and vent needlessly. Now, some people will definitely find it off-putting if you're not willing to play the game. And you will occasionally maybe even be cast out of some circles because you will be putting water on fires that people are taking pleasure in fueling. But your integrity will be intact. Your community will be stronger for your restraint, and your soul will be at peace. As for Dina, she never found her way into the ministry. In fact, in fairly short order, after all of that drama erupted, Dina left us quietly, and no one was quite sure where she went. I actually searched for her on Facebook when I was writing this. I didn't find her. I believe, though, that she acted more out of pain and a misguided sense of what true justice looked like than she did out of abject malice. Wherever Dina is, though, I hope that she is well. And I want to thank her for the lesson that I learned from what happened all of those years ago. Communities are sacred, but never forget that they are also fragile. There are certain lines we all know we shouldn't cross, and once we step over those lines, we unleash destructive forces which can't easily be reined back in. We are going to see a lot of that very soon coming from the leader of our nation. Many of our most sacred institutions are teetering in ways that we never would have thought possible just 10 years ago. The Dinas of the world are more active and strident than ever, and they are seeking to divide people and to consolidate power. Their efforts can only succeed, though, if the rest of us are seduced by our worst instincts and we get sucked into playing along. So let us leave this morning on the eve of Inauguration Day, strengthened in our resolve that we will be people who will not give in to those instincts to divide, and we will continue to hold our tongues when necessary and to always seek to build community and build bridges and push back when we hear something that's damaging or untrue. And now I would like you to join in the hymn that no one knows. What is actually the official hymn of the Unitarian Universalist ministry, and is always performed and sung when we have the service of the living tradition and any kind of a convocation, and it was actually the hymn that we processed to when we graduated at Meadville Lombard, number 358, rank by rank. If here this morning you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back. Give it to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace and enjoy your week. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together